My name is Killian Nolan. I'm the Director for Policy at the Abdul Latif Jameel Poverty Action Lab, or JPAL. Our Europe office is based at the Paris School of Economics, and we are a network of over 260 researchers around the world who use randomized control trials in particular to ensure that policy is backed by scientific evidence. And in Europe, a lot of our work focuses on employment policies, also on education, and social inclusion for all across Europe. And the research network has conducted research in over 20 different European countries. One reason why we focus on randomized control trials is to really isolate the effect of different policies on the beneficiaries and to sort of understand in the most rigorous way, coming back to these ideas of counterfactual impact evaluation, how can we understand the impact of the program or the policy and not just some other effects that may have been going on in the background, and also to try to eliminate some of the questions around selection that Martin was highlighting. And I was asked to prepare just a few remarks on how we can ensure that there is uptake of research findings by policymakers. I won't go too much into the kind of broader lessons, but I'll try to focus on some of those that I think are relevant today. My job is actually not to do the research, but instead I lead a team, a policy team that's focused on working with policymakers, with public employment agencies, among other institutions, governments across Europe, to actually ensure that research has an impact on policy. And I think the broad theme across everything we do is that uptake of research findings is driven by demand from policymakers rather than supply. So if we just come and say we have a great study, we'd love for you to actually act on it, generally the success rate is pretty low. But instead we sort of have to find, both in terms of timing, but also the issues where there are actual policy windows, where those who are in decision-making positions can actually act to take up evidence. And one of the ways that we do that is to try to institutionalize research partnerships so that from the very beginning of a study, we've kind of agreed on what the actual idea that we're trying to learn the answer to is and how it could affect policy. In some cases, even trying to ask a partner to think about, maybe even commit to decisions that they will make based on the findings of the research. I'll admit that that's rare, that people want to commit to using it, but I think even just understanding from the outset and playing a key role in the design of research can be a really effective way to encourage organizations to actually then use it. And just to pick up on the themes of Martin's presentation and the research that's being presented here today, I think the use of administrative data is an incredibly powerful tool for a number of reasons. One, as already highlighted, it helps reduce the cost of some of this research, particularly in terms of data collection, because the data is already there. But it's also a way for researchers and policymakers together to think about, even through descriptive analysis, but later actually trying to measure things in impact evaluation, to provide a more sustainable kind of contribution to an understanding of what's going on, how policies can be designed, and then to understand their impact. So I think the importance of administrative data is incredibly, it's a useful lesson for us to continue trying to learn more about across Europe, and a way to ensure that research actually contributes to building capacity in the institutions that are trying to make these decisions. And then the second theme that I would pick up on that comes up in a lot of our employment research, but also our work on education and social inclusion more generally that you just heard a little bit about, is that trying to ensure that we actually have impact often means going beyond the best prepared people who might enter the program. So, if you just want to ensure that your outcomes are very strong at the end, a sort of cheap way to do that is to think about those who are already going to do pretty well even without a program or policy, because you can be pretty sure that no matter how effective your policy is, at the end of the program, they'll be doing relatively well. And I think it's a much greater challenge to focus on those who might not be as well prepared, in this case for employment, who might be more distanced from the labor market, who might be less well equipped in different ways when they arrive in the program, and think about how a policy can actually be transformational. That's one reason why randomized evaluations and other counterfactual impact evaluation methods can be really useful, is helping us understand how the program actually impacted those who were involved and helped particularly those who were less well prepared, the more vulnerable, the more difficult to target, actually find employment. So I think that was just another strong theme to pick up on, and one that is, I think, a very good use of randomized control trials to really help policymakers understand where that impact is. I'd love to come back to this theme. It's one that motivates me quite a bit, but I'd also, given that we don't have too much time, like to hand it over to our panelists. And before I introduce them, I just want to mention that the online audience, those who are joining us and here today, will have a question and answer session after this panel. And so you can write your questions on the chat, and some of those will be picked up in the questions and comments session. So I'll introduce the panelists one by one and sort of ask them to share their expertise on questions that they've prepared. So first, to my left, is Emiliano Restichelli, and he is a labor market researcher working in the policy advisory unit of the Italian Ministry of Labor. In his research activity, he has focused on labor market institutions, skills, gender disparities, and policy evaluation, and he now chairs the Employment Committee. And Emiliano, the question that we have for you today is, how does sharing experience and lessons on designing and evaluating the efficiency of youth policies across the EU actually work? Does mutual learning across the member states occur, and is it helpful? And could you also tell us more about what the plans are regarding the reinforced youth guarantee?
First of all, thank you very much for this invitation to this very interesting conference. Already I had the occasion to appreciate really the efforts made to bring this topic of the evaluation at the center of your work. Which policies work for youth is a very complex question. Probably we don't have a one-size-fits-all approach or solution across member states, but of course it is very important to start from data and from well-done evaluation exercises. So let me just elaborate a little bit on your question. First of all, I would say that what we can call the multilateral approach is at the core of the activity of the Employment Committee, but also I would say of Europe as a whole. You know, the European semester is the framework in which member states do coordinate their economic and employment policies, and this coordination also means that countries exchange a lot, also assess the policies undertaken by other member states, and do, in other cases, somewhat take the best from other examples and try to translate these initiatives into their countries. This is indeed the coordination. The coordination is something which has to do with national policies, but also, of course, with a sort of common understanding on what policies do work, what are the priorities for a single country, but also for Europe as a whole. And so I think that this exchange of view, discussion, multilateral approach is really, I mean, at the core of the European semester, as I was saying, but what I can observe by now very long-standing member of the Employment Committee is that this process has constantly improved. For instance, in the Employment Committee, we carry out several thematic and country-specific reviews, all devoted to the different aspects of the employment guidelines, which are there to somewhat guide and give the line to the policy of member states to adhere to the Treaty of the European Union, to the Charter of the European Union, but also to the overall priorities set out by the Commission every 5 years. And in this thematic review, the exchanges are very fruitful, and the discussion are quite quite deep, and they touch upon several aspects of the employment and social policies of single member states. But as I was saying, all across Europe, we have now this broad framework of the European Pillar of Social Rights, which is, of course, a sort of flagship or a sort of framework in which policies are now implemented at national level. So, coming to the situation of young people, to youth policies, we have several occasions in which we discuss them. Of course, young youth employment is a quite widespread concern for many member states, and it is a cross-cutting cross-cutting issue that could be seen from several angles. Of course, the first one, which is the one we are also talking about today, is the broad umbrella of activation policies of the youth guarantee, but it's also a topic when it comes to on how to increase the employment of those groups that are underrepresented in the labor market, or when we talk about wage developments in Europe, when we compare the wage developments of different age cohorts. So there are a lot of exchanges, and I would say that in this context, exchanges do works well to also to learn from each other. Let me just dwell or elaborate on some topics, on some policy challenges, but also of some stories of success in some countries, which I think are relevant, and as the outcomes of this thematic discussion show that these are among the priorities of member states in this period. The first one was also, of course, mentioned a lot already today, but on which I would spend some more words, is this idea of the preventive approach. The youth guarantee comes when the young people leave the school or lose their job. But what member states are now trying to strengthen is this preventive approach to tackle, for instance, early school leaving, but also somewhat to strengthen education and career guidance during the education cycle. And this is a very key policy to implement in order to avoid to support young people at a later stage. What many member states are trying to do is to strengthen the relationship, the cooperation between the employment services and the education services, thus to provide young people with better guidance on their educational choices, on the labor market outcomes of their educational choices, and this is very key to address and to prevent youth unemployment and youth inactivity, which may be seen as two different aspects of the same coins. And along this line, and it was mentioned again also by Max this morning, what we are observing is a strong focus on reforming vocational education training system. Vocational education training system are key for several aspects, but in many member states they are considered not attractive, probably because their capacity to provide with labor market relevant skill is still low. And but on the other side, vocational educational training systems are key, at least in two aspects. The first one is to prevent early dropouts from schools. In many cases, unfortunately, they are seen as a second chance education, but member states are also working to make them more relevant to labor market needs. And this is particularly important in this phase, in this period, when we are facing with increasing labor market shortages in quite specific professions and occupation. And so I would say that these reforms of this revision of vocational educational training is quite common now across all European member states, including with a view of making them more flexible. So we are, many countries are trying to integrate the traditional delivery system of vocational educational training with more flexible tools like micro-credentials, individual learning accounts. That's also to make them somewhat continuous vocational educational training, also to address the problem of the lack of skill in the adult population. Of course, when it comes to the broad issue of involving and engaging with young people in activation policies, in active labor market policies, of course, there are a lot of topics, and I mean, probably we can bring them all together under the umbrella of the youth guarantee, but the youth guarantee is not the only solution to youth unemployment and inactivity, but in any case, many member states are focusing on the youth guarantee to address this topic. And the lesson learned, I mean, from our recurrent review in the employment committee, which is a biannual review, our task is to monitor the progress towards the implementation of the recommendation, the youth guarantee. With regard to this new recommendation, of course, there are some novelty that the member states are trying to integrate into their original plans, their original implementation plans. And so we are in a phase in which many countries are somewhat revising their plans, are reforming the youth guarantee, and the, I mean, general or the more widespread approach is that of making the youth guarantee somewhat more comprehensive and holistic. I think that many member states learned, and the Commission itself, I would say, learned from some errors made in the past. The first one was to consider the needs as a single block of people. That is not the case. It is a very heterogeneous group. And in this sense, the Commission, but also member states, are now trying to strengthen the mapping phase of the youth guarantee. That is to say, on the one side, mapping exactly who are the needs, where they are, because there are also important differences in terms of regional disparities. So on the one side, who are the needs, what are their needs? For instance, today was mentioned, and it's very important to remind that in the group of the needs, there is a large share of young women with children, and this is, of course, this kind of group, of course, needs a totally different approach from the youth, from the young from disadvantaged background with low skill. There are totally different people who need a totally different approach. But mapping also means, and this is quite a long debate, but also because it's full of caveats, the fact of mapping the services available for young people at a very different level, from the national level, the regional level, the local level. This comes the problem of here. There are some problems in some member states, depending on their on the institutional context, to coordinate all these services. So you have first to map them, especially where the governance is a different level, and then, of course, based on this, you can somewhat create tailored approach or tailored measure for different people. So another element that is very relevant and is related to many others, but the youth guarantee and the youth policies are very entangled all together. And today the problem of reaching out was mentioned, reaching out to the more vulnerable groups. Sorry. And here I would mention some experience of success based, for instance, on these mobile teams. That is people that moves all through the country to reach out to those who live in very remote areas of the country and try to engage them or just to make them aware of the fact that there are measures, opportunity to upskill, to reskill, to enter the labor market, to change their job. There is, of course, also based on the experience of the COVID-19 pandemic, a large use of new technologies in trying to reach out to these young people. But here, a little caveat I would make is that we must be cautious on the extensive use of these technologies, because they usually reach out to those who have digital skills. And what about those who have not these digital skills? So there is the need to keep a balanced approach. On the one side, of course, to make use of digital tools is important, also of social media, somewhat to make the public employment services more attractive to young people with a different language. But we also have to take into account that there are some groups that do lack of any basic digital skills, and so need to be reached out in person and to receive these services in person. I think I'm going quite long, so let me just conclude with a consideration concerning the objective of this research activity. It is very important to tailor policy measures based on the evaluation, and so today the problem of administrative data was mentioned many times in the employment committee. Indeed, we have a monitoring framework based on administrative data. Of course, it is a monitoring framework. We don't do evaluation, but with a lot of difficulties, many member states were at the end able to collect and to gather administrative data to have a sort of coherent, consistent and uniform monitoring framework for the youth guarantee. Of course, there are still some challenges in linking different administrative data sets, especially with the education data set, unfortunately, but I think we are in the right way. Of course, evaluation is a totally different thing, and I do agree we need more and more and more. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Our next panelist is Raffaele Trapasso. Raffaele, you are a senior economist at the OECD Center for Entrepreneurship, SMEs, Regions, and Cities, where you lead the organization's work on entrepreneurship, education, and skills, with a specific focus on higher education institutions and systems, and you are coordinating an international network of higher education institutions, businesses, and policymakers called ECOLE. And our questions for you, of course, then focus on entrepreneurship. Is this a good option for youth seeking entrance in the labor market? And what can we do, or is it even possible to create entrepreneurs, to teach young people entrepreneurial skills? And what can you tell us about how entrepreneurship education actually works?
Thank you, Killian. It is, I was listening to Emiliano. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a bit weird to be only 4 men on the stage. No, but it's it's the old order that is dying. The new one still has to be born. Entrepreneurship education, entrepreneurial skills have become quite central to the work of the OECD and the organization, and it's very important. Now, let me put a framework, so we will arrive there. I wanted to discuss 4 points. I will develop only the last one. to follow also up to Emiliano. Space. There is an immense difference in the results that you get in terms of analysis and policies depending on space, which is one of the variables of the heterogeneity that you have in your samples, but is the easiest to handle. And is the easiest to handle because of the second point, which is complementarities. You have different policies at play, and you have to, organize them. And while organizing them, automatically you bring on different actors, policy actors, that are local government, regional governments, that are in charge of very important pieces of the policy that we are discussing now. So, complementarity, multi-level governance to create a continuum in policies. Because our old approach, that you first educate and then you go to work, doesn't work anymore. So you need to change that, and how to change that is one of the problems there. The third point is evaluation. But the third point is not evaluation per se, is the use of evaluation that is important. Because unfortunately, what people think is that evaluation is to rank, to judge, to prize, never to learn. So, and this is a key problem, because if evaluation is used to prize or to punish, then is distorting, because you use only the indicators that you want to use, and the impact are manipulated by the player, because the player doesn't want to be badly evaluated, and so they use only the youth that works. So youth guarantee might be affected by the fact that if you want good results, then you take the good or the potentially good people, and then you work with them, eliminating for the sample those that are very difficult to work with, including young mothers with children. So that is, by the way, in the Yellow Vest story, they gave a lot of visibility to these people, individuals, young mothers with young kids, were only mothers, were the center of the Yellow Vest protest. Now they animated the protest, and this is extremely interesting from a social point of view. Then let me come to the fourth point, which is the one that I will develop a bit. There is incentives. Why, as a young person, should I engage with you, or not with you, but with policy makers offering me services? Now, and this comes, this is a point where we come with entrepreneurship. Okay, we live in a situation in which the next generation, poor them, has a lot of bears a lot of responsibilities, a lot of expectations. They have to save the world, all these nice things, and we are not offering them the tailored services in education, in social services, working labor services that they expect, to avoid any possible waste of talent, because we will need all talent possible to deal with the SDGs, with sustainability issues, etc. Entrepreneurship, and I come to your question. Sorry for being long. I'm Italian, so I take long ways to respond. First is because we are working on entrepreneurship because of Zuckerberg, Jobs, for all these people that created the mythology about the entrepreneur. Of course, this has created a startup hype. Everyone is excited about startup. We do like startup, but we believe that entrepreneurship education is not to create startups or unicorns or gazelles, etc. And this weird, but it is to provide people with a sort of mindset, so some characteristics in which they can become a bit positive about the possibility to solve problems. They become a little bit more creative. So entrepreneurship in reality is a spoon to feed complexity in the minds of these people that can be young, can be less younger. And this practice is an innovation in the education system, which is a system that is very difficult to innovate in. And our approach is that if you generate this hybrid system in which you move from theory to practice continuously, possibly with groups, with a methodology of education that is a bit different, then you might have results in terms of the personal features of these individuals. Okay, with the aim, as I said, is not that all of them become entrepreneurs. 99% do not become entrepreneurs. But what you have are people that have the capacity to activate their knowledge or their skills and to use practically when they are in an organization that already exists. Someone refers to that as intrapreneurship. I don't like specifically the use of different word, but we understand. So it is innovation. To do that is now promoting entrepreneurship education in education system is very difficult. We have started by assessing some business schools and engineering schools from the top of the distribution, where entrepreneurship education was nested, but is not there, that is more fertile. So actually we are trying to promote the mainstreaming of entrepreneurship education at this moment throughout higher education, because, and including vocational education and training, as Emiliano was rightly saying, because we want to innovate, or to help innovate the education system to give more, I would say, practical skills, but it's not only practical. You give a new perspective to educators and pupils or individuals engaging with this kind of education. We are about to generate a working group at the OECD within ECOL, Entrepreneurship Education, Collaboration and Engagement, that will try to have a quasi-experimental approach to entrepreneurship education, to understand what are the practices and the pedagogies that work in terms of this impact on the mindset. We have started, so it's a relatively new program of work, but as I said, it's promising and is interesting that we have the support of our community of practice, including some governments. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and I will just echo this reflection that there's a lot of work to be done to move away from a sense that evaluation is only about accountability and ranking, and is instead a learning tool. I think it's a key sort of focus of the work that we do, and that many of us, it's a big effort, I think, because people think of evaluation, they think of being ranked or sort of perhaps punished, but we hope it's a learning tool. Our last panelist is Wouter Zwijssen. He's a senior researcher in the Economic, Employment and Social Policies division of the ETUI, and he has degrees in political science and social policy analysis from the Universities of Antwerp and the Catholic University of Leuven, and gained a doctorate at the Institute for Social and Economic Research at the University of Essex. And my questions for you, Wouter, are what the role of trade unions is in helping young people in labor market integration. Do trade unions have interest in supporting the efficiencies of active labor market policies? And how should we build bridges between academic research and the trade union movement to improve social policies?
Okay, does this work? Perfect. Thank you very much for having me here and for this really interesting event. I thought it was very nice to see the results coming from this project. Oh, the sound changed quite suddenly. And I think it's incredibly important to do exactly these evaluations, to look at, with the administrative data, what works, what doesn't work, what creates good jobs. I was particularly interested in your approach as well, showing that in Spain the policies might not work as much, showing that it can actually lead to abuses. And in Hungary as well, there seemed some indications that some of the jobs were actually just used to give subsidies to have free labor in less good jobs. And that I think is really the focal point of why these sort of evaluations are needed. There's a lot of money being spent, and it's very important to know to what extent it works, to what extent it does actually benefit young people getting these good jobs. I was also incredibly interested in things you didn't talk a lot about now, but were on the website because it seems like such a vast project with so much output. The things on the public employment services and the outreach and the randomized control trials you did seemed very interesting to see to what extent they can actually help reach people more better, because there seemed to be a focus on trying to have the outreach, but public employment services don't necessarily see it as their job. And I saw in your outputs some things that are relatively cost effective in getting people to engage more, which was very interesting. So that's just my personal remarks. Now I'll talk a bit more about the questions you asked. So there are several main ways, I think, in which trade unions and trade union movement in general can play a big role here. And obviously they're very interested in this. It's crucial to try and get the young people more engaged in good jobs, so not just employment, but good quality jobs, which is important for everyone. And they do this in several ways. First of all, one of the things the Trade Union Congress is really focusing on is the Trade Union Confederation, is having more transparency, more clarity in what exactly is going on with the youth guarantee, with the different policies, where this project fits in perfectly well, right? It's important to know what works, what doesn't work, and have an idea of exactly what is going on with all this funds and all this money. And some of the projects, for instance, that were talked about this morning by Dr. Uber, for instance, New Alma, but also the Reinforced Youth Guarantee, it's very important to know what works, what is the focus, what's the main aim of those projects. That's not always so clear. Will it be more social inclusion, more focused on work? And then the focus should really be on, if it's about work, getting good quality jobs, not just any type of work, and not just replacing actual jobs through unpaid or highly subsidized positions. So that's one thing, monitoring what's going on and pushing for clarity and for policy-based, evidence-based policies. A second part is really focused on the young, and the trade union movement has its youth committees and it's worked through younger federations as well, with young trade union leaders, for instance. And one of the things they've been working on a lot is the issue of traineeships and the need for regulation and having no unpaid traineeships, obviously, but also having that well regulated. And I think some of that echoed in what some of the results you showed. We have highly subsidized traineeships. These can just be used as free or subsidized labor, replace tasks, and not actually benefit the young people as much. And that I think is a really crucial aspect as well, where again, one of the benefits of involving the trade union movement in this is that you get the information from the grassroots, right? From the young trade union members themselves. And then a third part is not specifically on the young, but can benefit the young very much. And that's really the focus on good quality jobs, where we're talking about precariousness, and also what Dr. Uber again mentioned this morning, the platform work directive, platform work in general. There's quite a lot, as you can imagine, quite a lot of work going on that. For instance, at ETOI, we recently did a big survey cross-nationally, seeing we talk a lot about platform work, but who does it? What are the conditions? And there it really comes out that it's mainly young people again, not exclusively, so it's not as cliche as that. There's a variety, but young people are very highly represented in not only online platform work and internet work, but just multi-employer work in general. Which means you really have to focus on having those jobs also work in terms of social security and access to social protection. And providing people with a decent income, because often, if you actually count all the hours that are being worked, this is low pay, often lower than minimum pay, and bad conditions, with again very little prospects. So those I think are the three main prongs. So one is evaluating what's going on with all this European money and all these funds, and it's very good to see some of it work. It's not good, but it's important to see what doesn't work and how this can be improved. Then the focus specifically on having young people, when they work, have it be good jobs, jobs of quality that can also provide prospects later on. And for this specifically, also make sure that there's not too much precarious work, and that also those who work on platforms or on temporary contracts are well protected, and have access to all the benefits they need. I'll stop there to not speak too long.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And I think with that, do we have time for some Q&A? Great.
Thank you to all the panelists. And so we are a little bit running out of time, so we just have time for a couple of questions. Maybe we will collect one question from the audience here from in presence, and maybe one question from the online audience. So we will start here. Is there any comment or questions?
Thank you a lot. So my name is Benjamin Robinet. I'm parliamentary assistant by the Parliament of the Brussels region. And we also had a study on the youth contract that are offered by the region. And it was shown, as the results were also discussed here at the beginning, that there is a sort of lock-in effect on youth. So my question would maybe go further and broadly on the evaluation topic. And could it be a bit argued that the youth guarantee and youth contracts are detrimental to youth long-term employment? Thank you.
Maybe we will. Maybe we can collect another here. Well, maybe I can ask a question myself. I just wanted a brief comment about this recent minimum wage directive, and if you think that it will interplay with the youth employment initiative in those countries that don't have minimum wage, as it seems that minimum wage will affect mainly or largely young people. May we start with the
Yes. Yes. I would not go as far as saying that the youth guarantee, broadly speaking, is not successful or is locking people into jobs that they would not want to be in. Our results basically show that we have to be very careful in evaluating not only the effects of how these the effects or the impacts, the net impacts of these programs that are being evaluated in the youth guarantee, but we also have to go a tiny bit closer and try to understand how these policies are actually being implemented, who gets into which program, and number two, how are these policies actually monitored, and how the public employment services ensure, or when they do not have the capacity, how they do not ensure that the goals of these different policies are met. And actually, this leads me on to a question, my question to Wouter, is that I think that he raised two extremely important points, or two things that raised ideas, is that there are some countries where the trade unions are an extremely important partner and have lots of influence and power in regulating the labor market, and also in some countries where the trade unions play an extremely important role in social policies. Now, obviously, in these countries, the trade unions can all have a role to play in outreach to young people, maybe not directly to them, but through their parents or however, who are trade union members. And also, obviously, they can monitor extremely, well, rather closely what is actually being done on the floor, on the work floor of the different plants. And I think this is a very important point, and I think this is something that we should pick up on. But then it raises the question of what to do in countries where the trade unions are not an important players, where the trade unions unfortunately are in a very vulnerable position themselves. Thank you very much.
Maybe we can leave the floor to the answer from the panelists, and then we will collect one last question from the online audience.
Yes, I will very brief because Martin already said a lot on but on the first question, I would say that we have an indirect indication of in our monitoring framework on the youth guarantee, which is what we call the recycling rate. The people that receive an offer exit from the program and then re-enter because they are again unemployed, and this is a good indication of the quality of the offer received. And there are countries in which this is a very problematic issue. In other, where we observe a good employment rate of young people even at 1 year and a half after the exiting from the program. And this brings me to a very lateral consideration about the fact that what we need to also to strengthen is the capacity of following up young people when we place them into a program or into employment, then to carefully follow up that young people. That is not always the case in all member states, despite they have the capacity through the administrative data to follow up young people. And so this is. As for your question, which is very interesting, but we have to read carefully the text of the directive, because I mean it does not imply that we have to set a legal minimum wage in all European countries. Those countries where a collective bargaining and this also links to the question by Martin. In those countries where collective bargaining is working well, the directive leaves to collective bargaining the right still to set minimum wages. So we will see the behavior of member states. We know that in those member states where there is a legal minimum wage, there are some countries which make some derogation for young people, for instance, just to take into account possible different level of productivity or inexperience, let's say, in the labor market. And finally, in the employment committee, we also have a recurrent country-specific review on the functioning of collective bargaining in European countries, and we are well aware that there are, let's say, 3 very problematic cases in Europe where we have to strengthen the role of social partners and their capacity to really have a role in the policy design at national level. Thank you.
Yes.
If I may just very briefly react to it, although Emiliano already said quite a lot on on what I'd want to say. But so indeed, with the minimum wage, there's also talk about the importance of collective bargaining, and of course we're pushing for strengthening that as much as possible. But you are absolutely right. In those places, trade union membership is declining. It's getting weaker in places. While we do have surveys and we find findings that the young are interested and there is a need there, it's hard to reach them. So that is a problem. What we do know is, for instance, if you look at sectors where there wasn't much trade union membership, where we look at platform work, for instance, you are starting to see some initiatives of people organizing and then linking to traditional trade unions. And so there are more innovative ways coming, which might also be useful. But apart from that, I can only say, yes, it's a problem and I don't know how to fix it. And the minimum wage, I think, will be important in terms of what I spoke about, having good quality jobs for everyone. But as you said, we'll have to see exactly how it turns out and whether there are deviations for young people. So I'll stop there and leave it.
Thank you. Yes, please, a question from the online
there is
audience.
a question related to Martin's presentation. What other monitoring indicators could be used to better measure the impact of youth guarantee on the more vulnerable groups? So it's related to the remarks about the raw indicators.
I assume this might be a question which is more relevant for Emiliano, but it would all we can't hope that these indicators are about net impact, but I think that we're not all the way there to be able to have these indicators. But obviously, it would be extremely important to have breakdowns, at least, of enrollment into the youth guarantee and effects or employment outcomes of young people enrolled in the youth guarantee, broken down by more important categories such as low education or some indication of vulnerability, which can be relatively easily measured. I think that would be already a first step. That used to be, or it still is, an alternative indicator, which it exists, but nobody, as my understanding is that we do not focus on these indicators enough. Thank you very much, but maybe Emiliano.
Thank you. I think we have to finish here. We are a little bit ahead of time. So thank you very much for all participants, and we will make a break. We will resume at 1 o'clock.